All right, so welcome everyone to this second day of plenaries at UDS. Next up, we've got Chris Kenyon, VP of Sales and Business Development in Canonical, and the man you should really listen to when he says Ubuntu means business.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone had a great lunch. This is a rather unique setting. We have folk who are attending the Ubuntu Developer Summit in the room. I'm sure there's a good smattering of Linaro folk in the room as well, who are very much the heart of improving the performance of Linux on the ARM architecture. And we've also got about 140, 150 customers, partners, and prospective customers in the event who are doing a separate summit called the Ubuntu Enterprise Summit. And so I was trying to put together some content that would appeal to everybody and hopefully be informative about how these journeys or how these interests are actually overlapping. And I think it's testament to where open source has got to, that we no longer have to say, here's where the upstream world is. Here is where a Linux distribution is, and then here are where customers are. It's actually the fact that I think the open source community has got much more sophisticated about its understanding of what the needs of end customers are and how they consume technology. It's also true that a lot of the our end customers have got much more relaxed and comfortable with the benefits, both economic and in terms of flexibility, that open source brings. So it's very good to have you all in this room together. I'm excited to be here in Copenhagen. I got here on Thursday, I think just in time for a brisk winter wind. And I was struck going around over the weekend that how many design shops there were. There seems to be a country where design is held in very high regard. I had my children with me as well. They're 3 and 4, and so of course we went down to the Lego shop in the center of town. And some of you who know me will know I'm quite passionate about cycling, and so I hired myself a Christiana bike and had the kids in the front of the bike as I was going around the town. And I was struck this is a great location for an Ubuntu Developer Summit, because great design, modular rebuildable blocks, and a focus on energy efficiency seems to be pretty much in line with what we're doing here. So I'm going to cover desktop, server, and then critically how Canonical helps people deploy in both those environments. And I'm going to talk at a little bit broader scale than just what people are doing in individual companies. I'm going to hopefully interweave a little bit about what we are doing as a company with PC manufacturers and server manufacturers, and explain how all these threads hopefully help you get what you want out of Ubuntu as a platform. So, the future's been built on open platforms. And when we talk about this, we're talking about everything from web scale. So this morning, those of you in the Enterprise Summit would have heard that Instagram, Uber, TwitPic, Foursquare are just some of the web scale startups in the Valley that are all being founded and base their infrastructure on Ubuntu. It's also happening in terms of public cloud. We've heard about how HP are building their public cloud on Ubuntu, and how even on proprietary clouds, how often the dominant guest OS is Ubuntu. But it's also the case now in desktops and increasingly in smartphones, as we all carry these extra devices around. There is a battle playing out between the open options and the proprietary platforms. So what does this mean in the desktop space? Well, these were some statistics that I shared in Oakland 6 months ago, where I talked about the fact that here at Canonical, we've worked with PC manufacturers to install Ubuntu on over $7.5 billion worth of hardware in the last 2 years. That doesn't mean that you can go down necessarily the street here in Copenhagen and find it in a shop, but it does mean that an awful lot of work is being done to enable common PC models and makes and models with Ubuntu, and that we have optimized images for those. I also said that we were working with all the leading ODM manufacturers, the top 10 ODMs in Taiwan, and that we've trained over 1,800 ODM engineers on the issues around testing, installing, ghosting, doing quality assurance with Linux. And I said that we were pretty confident that we'd be 9% of global PC shipments by 2014, which is, get there, will be an extraordinary accomplishment. Some updates since Oakland. Obviously, with Dell, we have now over, I think, almost 400 stores in China where we're promoting Ubuntu in the retail experience. You can see this is really the open desktop being given pride of place. That translates into an awful lot of models that are now enabled with Ubuntu. So I hope that none of you can read that. The goal is you can't. But Dell, Lenovo, and HP are now certifying Ubuntu, working with us to make sure that enormous numbers of their models and makes are working with Ubuntu. It's not complete, and up until this week, we've actually only been able to talk about Dell, Lenovo, Asus pre-installing. For those of you who didn't catch what Mark said yesterday, we're delighted to have added HP now to that mix. And a couple of people came up to me and said, is it really true what Mark said yesterday, that HP are now shipping Ubuntu pre-installed? So I called up Danica Han, who works in our Beijing office, and I said, Danica, get down to a local retail store and show me a photo. So that's hot off the presses as of yesterday. Why do you care if you're in Denmark that in China we're pre-installing Ubuntu? It means that we're doing the work, that we're putting the pressure on all of the hardware vendors, the guys who make the drivers for the Bluetooth attachments, for the screens, for the graphics cards, for the CPUs. They are all focused on making sure that their latest technologies work with Ubuntu, whether or not you're doing 3 engineering workstations or buying 10,000 desktops for the Danish library system. You care about the fact that these OEMs are working with us. So there's one OEM who are not shipping Ubuntu, and I did have a conversation recently with somebody who said they could hook us up with their CEO and make an introduction. But the sales team on the West Coast say, no, Christopher, you're being a little bit ambitious here. There is one OEM who I just wanted to highlight, who we may have trouble breaking into, but I wanted to highlight what their shipment numbers are. And it's Apple. So I'm not convinced we're going to get them to ship Ubuntu pre-installed in the next 2 years. But I do think it's fascinating that if you look at the number of units that we shipped in financial year 2011, it puts us somewhere between those 2 bars. And I think that's a huge testament to all of the developers, the upstream contributors, and to customers here who are putting pressure on the industry to make the open desktop a reality. Well done. Okay, Mark yesterday talked about gaming, and we had a fantastic talk from Drew at Valve about what they're doing to bring Steam, their gaming platform, to Ubuntu. For those of you not familiar with this, the reason that gaming engines are so important is that they're at the heart of how games are produced, and without the gaming engine being ported to Ubuntu, it's very hard for an individual game developer to do that. I'd like to talk about a local company based here in Copenhagen and invite up Natasha Bard, who's the lead Linux developer who's been working on their port of the Unity engine to Linux, to come up on stage and talk a little bit about what they're doing. Come up, Natasha. Big round of applause. So, we didn't have us pre-wired, did we? So we're going to run this like a little informal Q&A.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about Unity and what you do.
So Unity is a platform for developing games. It consists of mainly 2 parts. One of them is a multi-platform engine that does the actual rendering and runs the game code, and etc. And it consists also of a tool set for content creation. And the big idea we have behind Unity is that we do absolutely everything we can to make it so that our users are able to make a game once in Unity and with as little or no modification as possible deploy that game to a very wide range of platforms and devices. So for a long time we've had the ability to export games to Mac OS X and Windows desktop. We're very successful on iOS and in Android. We have, it's also possible to export games to all of the current generation consoles. We're also working with Nintendo on their next generation console. And we're we also the web player as well. We have our own web plugin for browser-based games. And we're very happy that in Unity 4, there will be the ability to export to both 32 and 64-bit Linux.
Wow, huge. So one of the things I was most struck by when we talked yesterday was you talking about the number of developers that you have actively using the Unity engine. Can you sort of give us an idea of scale?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to measure. We have over 1 million registered users, and we have, I believe, 300,000 active developers at any given time. And in September of this year, we just surpassed 4 million starts of the editor, which is our toolkit.
Okay, so an awful lot of people doing that. Now, in terms of gaming, can you talk a little bit about the first games that have come across to the platform?
So right now, the Linux export feature it's still in beta. It's being shipped to the customers who have pre-ordered Unity 4, and we've been working very closely with a couple of developers to get the first games up and running and get all of the bugs and problems worked out. So far we have the launch title, the official launch title for Unity on Linux was a game from a studio that's very near and dear to our heart called Recoil. The name of the game is Rochard, and it was part of the Humble Indie Bundle 6. And then there's also a game called Cubeman, which is in the Ubuntu Software Center as well. And yeah, I mean, Cubeman is very much a testament of how easy it is, because this is a game that's been very successful on the OS X desktop, on the iPad, for example, and with very little work, he had it up and running, and in the Ubuntu Software Center, no problem.
Awesome. So I think we have a little show reel, maybe of a couple of games. So developers haven't yet committed to coming across to Ubuntu, but some of the games that are already available on Unity. Can we bring up the show reel?
Yeah, this is a show reel from our Unite Developer Conference about 2 months ago, and it just shows some of the best content created in Unity in the last year.
This is the show reel I don't show my wife, I think. Awesome. Okay, so thanks very much. So I think a big round of applause for Unity. And if you're wondering what to do tonight, download Rochard. I think it's $9.99 in the Ubuntu Software Center, and start that lifelong obsession. Again, this matters, even if you're in the enterprise audience. Without that consumer interest, without pushing that volume up from the 9 million units we shipped in 2011, you don't get the hardware support you need to get desktops and laptops the way that you need them configured. Just as a final aside, obviously we do a lot of work in India and China. I thought I'd share this. This is the screenshot of the standard OEM image for China, and you can see that it's pre-installed with a lot of Chinese content. And one of the things some Linux in emerging markets doesn't stay as Linux. And one of the things we're very focused on is by bringing these gaming platforms and by customization and making it appropriate for local market to make this a really compelling first couple of hours experience in an open desktop, and making sure that all of those desktops stay with Ubuntu. So, talking about the desktop in business. This morning we talked about Capgemini's usage of Ubuntu. Here are just a couple of other case studies. Allied Irish Bank, 7,500 desktops, including average folk in the bank doing business. These are not developers who are using Ubuntu. Very large-scale deployment. LVM Insurance, over 10,000 units. And for those of you who were at the Oakland Summit 6 months ago or down at San Diego at LinuxCon about a month ago, you'll have heard Thomas Bushell from Google talking about how they're using Ubuntu on over 10,000 desktops and laptops. All the issues you face in terms of Active Directory integration, in terms of management of desktops at that scale, are being hit by other customers. And we're delighted to put you in contact with them or to talk through with our consultancy, our own Ubuntu Advantage consultancy teams to talk about how these common problems get addressed. I don't know if the Ministry of Defense for the Netherlands are in the room. We are. They can talk about some really innovative thin client usage they're doing with Ubuntu, which I believe will scale up to 40,000. I got that right? Right now about 40,000 desktops that they're using an Ubuntu-based client on. So if you think that the Ubuntu or the open desktop is not going to happen, think again. This is going to happen, and it's going to happen because of folk in this room. I've talked about hardware support. I'm not going to read through this slide other than to say every day of every week we're in contact with industry partners, making sure that the next piece of magic that comes out of a silicon factory is going to be enabled with Ubuntu. It's not always totally plain sailing, but it's better than ever. So, wake up time, people. We talk about Windows 8 a lot, and whether or not that the swipe experience and then the sudden slap on the face of hitting an old desktop experience is a real issue. I think in many ways, when I talk to customers, the end of life of XP is actually a bigger issue. Talk to a lot of customers, still a lot of XP out there. It's coming, that end of life, and it's time to rethink how you do desktops in corporate environments. Why? Not because it's open. I'd love that to be the only reason, but when we talk to customers, it's because it's about security, about cost, flexibility, and manageability. And there are two trends that are really contributing to this. Think about traditional environment. You have multiple Windows environments, and then you have legacy, on-site, CRM, email, file servers, and data. And two trends are changing that. One is you're suddenly letting in all these other devices. iOS and Android have come into the enterprise, and you're suddenly having to work out how to deal with authentication with other operating systems which don't come from Microsoft. The second trend is this, fundamentally, that many of the core applications, Salesforce data, HR data in Talio, or whatever it is becoming something you access through the web. But of course, this doesn't all happen at the same time. We don't all have the luxury of working at Google, where they got to rip up the book and start with entirely new infrastructure. We're not all working at Instagram, where, again, you can start with a very cloud-based infrastructure. The truth is you have to deal with both. And that's where some of the work we're doing around thin clients, I think, is really exciting. And I'm going to invite David Barth, who is the product manager around thin client and one of the lead engineers on thin client, to do a little demo of some of the new functionality you can see in 12.10. So if we can cut to David's output on the screen, that would be great. So David, can you just talk me through what you're going to do here?
Right, so what I'm going to demonstrate is actually a new feature we introduced in Ubuntu 12.10, and which is just below, this new remote login option that lets you go and open a Windows session directly, actually a remote desktop session, whatever is running, on the other end of the network. So, and the great thing about it is that every desktop now can become your own desktop, right? Because we do have a cloud service that is taking care of all the configuration and, lets you work wherever you are. So this is what I'm just doing. So I'm connecting to our cloud service. Password is a bit more complicated. Right, and I do have a few sessions that I've already configured, and that just let me connect straight to a Windows instance in that case. So it's all coming over the network, over Wi-Fi. So
Right. Don't do that. We might have a security issue.
No. It means enterprise. Right, and so I can then just log off and nothing stays on the system. This is a fully stateless system that you have in this case.
So I think we have to sort of talk that through. So you're running Ubuntu on this desktop, standard image of Ubuntu. People can log in, or you could configure that. So the Capgemini team earlier were talking about the fact they were locking down actually what you could do on the Ubuntu desktop. And then from the same login screen, you've gone straight into a Windows session.
Yeah.
And could that be an Ubuntu session on the server?
Sure, yeah. Actually, I do have that. So it's not meant to be run into production environment yet, but of course, if Windows can do it, so can we. So
I'm always impressed by somebody who can type accurately while being watched by 400, 500 people.
Actually, not that well. Let me try it again.
Yeah, that's one for the books, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I also have this extra instance. So it's going to be a bit slower, right? I apologize for that, but this is also something we'll be able to offer, in a bit.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
So later, etc. Well, can't type anyway. Anyway.
Fantastic.
Right, and again, if I log out, nothing stays on the system.
So for banks, folks who take security very seriously, in defense organizations and other types of organizations, that's an ability to keep all the data centrally on the server and then use a secure desktop where there's none of that data on it. Exactly. Fantastic. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
So what David just showed there was logging into a Windows desktop and Ubuntu desktop. What you will see very shortly from us is this ability to blend the two together and actually have Windows applications being streamed over remote protocol into an Ubuntu environment. So you have a browser, everything you'd expect from Ubuntu, and then have remote applications well integrated together in the desktop environment. So let's move on to Ubuntu Server, and I'm conscious on time. So as many of you know, Weta Digital, who rendered Avatar and The Lord of the Rings, do that all on Ubuntu. It's a 36,000 core render farm running on Ubuntu. It's not something you can fit in the garage. I thought it'd be fun just to start with the fact that Avengers, partially rendered by Weta on Ubuntu. I thought it's pretty exciting. And from Iron Man, we've now gone to the Man of Steel, coming shortly to a cinema near you, also rendered on Ubuntu. So I think that's pretty exciting. But it's also interesting because I think about render farms as being very much the Ubuntu Server 1.0. We set out for the first few years just to take a lot of the goodness of Debian and establish Ubuntu Server as an excellent choice for an edge-of-the-network server. People who just needed a ton of great rock-solid servers. I'm getting a message here about power. Okay. And then what happened was this extraordinary disruption of 3 megatrends: public cloud, big data, and open cloud. And it turns out that Ubuntu, because of its modularity, because of its economics, was at the heart, or is at the heart, of all 3 of these trends. Public cloud, anywhere between 60 and 80% of workloads on Amazon Web Services running on Ubuntu. NoSQL solutions, of which there are 15 plus, the majority of which are developed on Ubuntu. If you want the innovation of the NoSQL community, Hadoop, 10gen, then being on Ubuntu is the best way to get it. And then obviously private cloud. OpenStack, Eucalyptus, CloudStack, we have a clear favorite there, but they're all welcome in terms of the private cloud development on top of Ubuntu. And I really think that with the server, we're now entering a sort of 2.0 phase, where Ubuntu is just the default choice for next generation workloads, be public guest, private cloud, big data. And obviously with HP's ProLiant support, there's now very broad certification that you can get in terms of buying a server off the street or off the web with Ubuntu certification. And something we announced at LinuxCon 2 weeks ago was that Quanta and Cisco will be added to that. And so we're very excited to have 2 additional major server manufacturers in the world work with Ubuntu server. One last conversation, or just point about server. I want to just talk about OpenStack. Gartner released a report about a week ago or 2 weeks ago saying that they were nervous about whether or not Gartner was ready for prime time and ready for enterprise. I sort of want to put just the following in context. We chose OpenStack very early on. We've been working with it since sort of day one when 70 people got together in Austin. It's got industry momentum. Just an extraordinary number of companies are pouring their innovation into OpenStack. It is community in action. We have never seen an open source community like OpenStack. We haven't seen one like it for 10 plus years. It's started by a community, it's developed by a community, it's marketed by a community, and it's exceptionally well funded. Just look at foundations. It's just behind the Linux Foundation in terms of actual funding. People absolutely believe it's innovation. And I'm going to use a non-tech analogy, or slightly non-tech analogy, to talk about where you put your open cloud dollars. If you were a marketing manager in the early 90s and you were talking about doing online marketing, you might be persuaded that going with CompuServe or Prodigy was a more polished, slightly readier for prime time place to build your online marketing presence. And there might be someone like Gartner telling you that, ooh, the real World Wide Web, it's a bit hairy right now. I think everyone in this room would probably say that putting your money in getting to use to the full proper internet, full World Wide Web, would have been a better way of spending your time in terms of learning about a new cloud environment. And that's exactly how we feel about OpenStack now. There may be some roughness around the edges, although we are now working with partners around the world taking it into production, but it's absolutely what we're backing for Open Cloud. Okay, on to sort of the final part of what I wanted to cover today. In this room, in our customers, you are incredibly smart customers. If you're using Linux and open and thinking about open source, you're already ahead of your competition. I just wanted to make a point to you that logging a Launchpad issue or bug is not the same as having support from Canonical. Okay, so Launchpad is there as an open discussion about everything we do. But here at Canonical, we also have a global team who've put together what we call Ubuntu Advantage. And Ubuntu Advantage for us is a collection of assets and support tools. It includes systems management tools through Launchpad, which we've just got to the 2.0 of, access to our knowledge base, legal assurance. If that is a blocker for you, it's increasingly not such a big blocker for our customers. And critically, platform and application support. Whether or not you need support on the base operating system, on KVM or Zen as a hypervisor, all the way up through to every application you can get out of the main repository. We are here to help you. I was down at the San Diego conference, and Thomas from Google was talking about how they use Ubuntu there at Google. Of course, they could do almost all of this on their own, but they choose to get support from the Canonical support team because it turns out that they can focus on harder problems or different problems which are actually more impactful to their business. So that team is a crack team in terms of the support team. They were released only a few years ago from the Linux Underground. And if you've got hard problems, I would strongly recommend that you think about contacting the UA team.
If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A team.
So, good timing. So, who takes advantage of this service? And I think this is just the penultimate slide I want to share. That's our growing customer list of people who are getting support or consultancy services from Canonical. You'll see it's across a wide variety of industries, a wide variety of sectors. I hear there's a political election in the US next week. I just want to point out we have socialist health services up there as well as private ones. Whichever side of the political divide, we've got them covered. Huge number of government organizations, police forces, ministries of defense. this is a rock-solid service, global, 24/7, offering support in Chinese, French, English, and German, and other languages being added. It's something we would love to engage with you on. I've run slightly over, and I just wanted to end by saying we launched last week insights.ubuntu.com. It's a great white papers, case studies, and best practices from customers and partners. And if you want to find out more about how people are using Ubuntu in the enterprise, then that's a great asset to go to. Thank you very much for your time.